Jakari Martin Chagrin told investigators that he and Maya Johnson were arguing at their home on River Breeze Lane. He said he grabbed some of his belongings and was trying to leave when the gun went off. He claims the gun was not in his hand, but pinned against his body. The gunshot killed Johnson and her unborn child.
On a quiet Tallahassee evening, behind the closed door of what should have been a sanctuary, a 26-year-old woman's future vanished in a single moment. Maya Johnson wasn't walking alone at night. She wasn't in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was home. Safe, or so she thought. 9 weeks pregnant, carrying hope for tomorrow, she had no idea that an ordinary argument would escalate into something irreversible. There were no strangers involved. No masked intruder. No random act of violence. This was someone she knew. Someone she trusted enough to let into her space, into her life. When the gunshot shattered the silence that night, it didn't just end one life. It ended two. And in the aftermath, investigators would piece together a story that raises one haunting question. How does love, or what we mistake for love, become the most dangerous thing of all? Tallahassee moves at its own rhythm. It's a city that exists somewhere between Southern tradition and college town energy, where tree-lined streets give way to modest neighborhoods where people know their neighbors, where front porches still matter, where life feels predictable. On most nights, you can hear the sounds of normal life. Children playing, dogs barking, the distant hum of traffic. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing that suggests tragedy is just moments away. But on this particular night, inside one of those quiet homes, something was unraveling. There was no commotion that would draw attention from the street. No screams that would make neighbors peer through their curtains. No flashing lights, no sirens. Not yet. Just the ordinary sounds of an ordinary evening, right up until the moment everything changed. Maya Johnson was 26 years old. She had her whole life stretching out before her like an open road. She was 9 weeks pregnant, carrying a secret that was still too early to announce to the world, too fragile to celebrate publicly. That tiny life inside her was just beginning to take shape, just beginning to form fingers and toes, just beginning to become real. Maya was planning for a future that included diapers and baby names and late-night feedings. She was imagining what it would feel like to hold her child for the first time. She never got the chance. Inside her home that night, in a space that was supposed to be her refuge, her safe place, her sanctuary from the chaos of the outside world, Maya's life ended. No stranger forced their way through her door. No random act of violence invaded her peace. This was something far more intimate, far more devastating. This was someone who had access. Someone who knew where she lived. Someone who knew her routines, her habits, her vulnerabilities. Someone she had chosen to let in. And that choice, that trust, that moment of vulnerability, would cost her everything. To understand what was lost that night, you have to understand who Maya was before she became a headline, before she became another statistic, before her name was added to the long list of women who die behind closed doors. Maya was 26. She had just entered the phase of life where the world starts to make sense, where you begin to figure out who you are and what you want. She wasn't a teenager anymore, fumbling through uncertainty. She wasn't in her 30s yet, settled into the patterns that define adulthood. She was right there in the middle, in that beautiful, terrifying space where anything still feels possible. Those who knew her described her as private. Not withdrawn or antisocial, but someone who chose her circle carefully. She wasn't the type to broadcast every detail of her life on social media. She wasn't looking for attention or validation from strangers. She moved through the world quietly, intentionally, keeping her personal life close to her chest. She was soft-spoken, the kind of person who listened more than she talked, who observed before she acted. She was family-oriented. In a world that increasingly celebrates independence and self-sufficiency above all else, Maya understood the value of connection. She maintained ties with the people who mattered. She showed up for family gatherings. She remembered birthdays. She was the kind of daughter who called home regularly, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Her family wasn't just a safety net. They were her foundation. And she was building something. A life. A future. Whatever struggles she may have faced privately, whatever challenges she was working through, she was moving forward. She had a routine. She had structure. She wasn't someone whose life was defined by chaos or crisis. She wasn't frequently in trouble. Law enforcement didn't know her name before that night. She was just a regular woman trying to build a regular life in a regular neighborhood. But she was also 9 weeks pregnant. Pregnancy is hope made tangible. It's the ultimate act of faith in the future. For 9 months, a woman's body transforms, building a new life cell by cell, moment by moment. At 9 weeks, the changes are still mostly invisible to the outside world. There's no visible baby bump yet. No obvious announcement to strangers. Just a secret growing quietly inside, a future taking shape in the dark. Maya was in that early, delicate stage. The stage where every day matters. Where morning sickness might be hitting. Where exhaustion is constant. Where the reality of impending motherhood starts to sink in, bringing with it a complicated mix of excitement and terror. She was probably thinking about doctor's appointments and prenatal vitamins. She was probably wondering if it would be a boy or a girl. She was probably already imagining what her child would look like, what their laugh would sound like, what kind of person they would become. She was planning for a future that would never arrive. The house where Maya died wasn't in a war zone. It wasn't in a neighborhood plagued by gun violence or gang activity. It wasn't the kind of place where people are afraid to walk after dark or where residents install bars on their windows and multiple locks on their doors. It was just a house. A regular house in a regular residential neighborhood. The kind of place where people wash their cars on Saturday mornings and wave to their neighbors and complain about property taxes. The kind of place where children ride their bikes and where the biggest disruption is usually a barking dog or a loud party. This wasn't a high-crime zone. This wasn't an area where violence was expected or normalized. This was supposed to be safe. And inside that house, inside those walls that were supposed to protect her from the dangers of the outside world, Maya should have been untouchable. A person's home is supposed to be their castle, their fortress, the one place where they can let their guard down completely. You lock your doors at night not because you're expecting an attack, but as a symbolic gesture, a final barrier between you and everything out there that might wish you harm. But what happens when the danger doesn't come from outside? What happens when the threat isn't a stranger breaking through a window, but someone who walks through the front door as if they have every right to be there? What happens when the person you need protection from is the same person you've invited into your most private space?
You don't think with your man, because y'all can't get a bag like this. You get a bag like this, you put that nigga in there, you know where you at all times, baby. All times.
Okay.
The house wasn't ransacked. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This wasn't a home invasion. This was something else entirely. The shooting occurred indoors. Inside the house. In a private space. Away from witnesses. Away from cameras. Away from anyone who might have intervened. And that detail matters. Because it tells us something crucial about what happened that night. It tells us that whoever shot Maya didn't have to break in. They didn't have to force their way past security systems or locked doors. They were already inside. They had access. They were either someone Maya had welcomed into her home, or someone who had the keys, the codes, the permission to be there. This was someone familiar. Someone known. Someone trusted. And that makes it so much worse. The evening started like any other. There's no evidence that Maya sensed danger coming. She wasn't barricading herself inside. She wasn't calling for help. She wasn't texting friends with cryptic messages about feeling unsafe. She was just existing in her space, going through the motions of an ordinary night. Maybe she was making dinner. Maybe she was watching television. Maybe she was scrolling through her phone, thinking about baby names or nursery colors. Maybe she was tired, the exhaustion of early pregnancy pulling at her, making her want to climb into bed early and sleep for 12 hours straight. We don't know exactly what she was doing. We only know what happened next. At some point during those evening hours, an argument began. Investigators would later confirm this detail. There was a verbal dispute. Words were exchanged. Tension escalated. Two people who knew each other, two people who had some kind of relationship, some kind of history, found themselves in conflict. Arguments happen. They're a normal part of human interaction. People disagree. Tempers flare. Voices get raised. In healthy relationships, in safe situations, arguments are uncomfortable but ultimately harmless. You say things you regret. You storm off. You slam a door. And then, eventually, you calm down. You apologize. You work through it. You move forward. But this argument was different. There's no evidence of a prolonged physical fight. No indication that Maya and her killer struggled for an extended period. No signs that she had time to defend herself or that she saw the violence coming in time to react. This wasn't a drawn-out confrontation. This wasn't two people locked in combat. This was a verbal dispute that suddenly, without warning, became lethal. And in that gap, in that space between angry words and irreversible action, Maya's fate was sealed. She had no idea that the person standing in front of her was capable of this. No indication that the argument they were having would be her last. No reason to believe that, in the next few seconds, everything would be over. And then the gun appeared. In homes across America, in arguments that happen behind closed doors, there's often a moment of escalation. A moment where things could still go either way. A moment where someone could choose to walk away, to take a breath, to step back from the edge. But when a weapon enters the equation, that moment collapses. The possibility of de-escalation vanishes. The power dynamic shifts completely. Maya was facing someone with a gun. Someone angry enough, desperate enough, or out of control enough to point it at her, and at the life growing inside her. And then, in a single moment that can never be undone, the trigger was pulled. The gunshot shattered the silence. In a residential neighborhood where the loudest sounds are usually lawn mowers and car doors, the sharp crack of gunfire cut through the night. Neighbors might have heard it. They might have frozen for a moment, wondering what that sound was. They might have looked at each other and asked, was that a gunshot or a car backfiring? They might have peeked through their blinds, trying to see what was happening without exposing themselves to danger. But by the time anyone understood what was happening, by the time 911 was called and police were dispatched and first responders rushed to the scene, it was already too late. Maya Johnson was struck by that bullet. Her body absorbed the impact, the force, the brutal physics of violence. And in that instant, 2 lives ended. The emergency response came quickly. In situations like this, every second counts. Dispatchers relay information. Police officers race to the scene, adrenaline pumping, not knowing exactly what they'll find when they arrive. EMTs grab their equipment and prepare for the worst. When law enforcement arrived at Maya's home, they secured the scene immediately. This is protocol. Before anyone can help, before any medical intervention can begin, officers need to make sure there's no active threat. They need to make sure the shooter isn't still there, isn't still armed, isn't going to target responders. They moved through the house systematically, clearing rooms, checking corners, making sure it was safe for paramedics to enter. And then they found her. Maya was down. The medical team rushed in, assessing the situation with practiced efficiency. They checked for a pulse. They looked for signs of life. They initiated emergency protocols, doing everything they could to reverse what had just happened. But some things can't be undone. The bullet had done its work. Maya's injuries were catastrophic. And complicating everything was the pregnancy. She wasn't just a single patient. She was 2 lives in one body. The paramedics were trying to save a mother and a child, trying to work miracles in a situation where miracles were impossible. Despite their efforts, despite their training, despite their desperate attempts to pull Maya back from the edge, she was gone. The woman who had been planning for a future, who had been imagining her child's first smile, who had been building a life one careful decision at a time, was pronounced dead. And with her death came another. At 9 weeks, the child inside her had no chance of survival. That tiny, forming life, that collection of cells that was on its way to becoming a person, died too. No first breath. No first cry. No name. No birth announcement. No future. Just absence. Just loss. Just another what could have been that would haunt everyone who knew Maya for the rest of their lives. As investigators processed the scene, they noted details that told a clear story. There was no random weapon discarded somewhere. No gun thrown out a window in a panic. No evidence that the shooter had fled in a chaotic escape. The person who killed Maya didn't run far. They were either still on scene or nearby. And that meant police had a very clear idea of who they were looking for. This wasn't a mystery. This wasn't a whodunit that would require months of investigation and careful forensic analysis. The circumstances pointed directly to someone specific. Someone known. Someone connected to Maya. Within a short time after Maya's death, a man was taken into custody. There was no manhunt. No multi-state chase. No dramatic arrest after weeks of evading authorities. The person responsible was identified quickly and apprehended without significant resistance. This tells us something important. It tells us that police knew exactly who to look for. It tells us that the suspect was either present at the scene or connected to it in an undeniable way. It tells us that this wasn't a stranger passing through Tallahassee who happened to commit a random act of violence. This was someone who had a relationship with Maya. Someone who knew her. Someone who was part of her life in some capacity. The details of their relationship would become central to understanding what happened that night. Was he a current boyfriend? An ex who couldn't let go? Someone she was trying to distance herself from? Someone who had been part of her life for years, or someone new who had recently entered it? What we know for certain is that there was an intimate or romantic connection. This wasn't a business associate. This wasn't a distant acquaintance. This was someone Maya had let into the most private parts of her life. Someone she had been emotionally close to. Someone who had access not just to her home, but to her heart. And that's what makes this so devastating. Because Maya wasn't killed by a stranger. She wasn't a victim of random violence. She was killed by someone she knew. Someone she trusted. Someone who, in another context, might have been the person she called when she was scared or in danger. When the suspect was arrested and charged, the severity of the situation became immediately clear. This wasn't just a simple homicide charge. The fact that Maya was pregnant elevated everything. Under Florida law, the death of an unborn child can be prosecuted separately. That tiny life, though never born, was legally recognized as a victim. So this wasn't just one count of murder. This was 2 deaths. 2 lives stolen. 2 futures erased. The charges reflected that reality. Relationships are complicated. They exist in layers that outsiders can never fully penetrate. What people present to the world is often vastly different from what happens behind closed doors. The couple that seems perfect on social media might be barely holding it together in private. The relationship that looks healthy from the outside might be rotting from the inside. Maya's relationship with her killer was no exception. From what investigators pieced together, there was evidence of romantic or intimate involvement. These were 2 people who had been close. They had shared something. Whether it was love or obsession, or something in between, there was an emotional connection that bound them together. But what was the nature of that connection? Was it healthy or toxic? Was Maya happy or trapped? Was she trying to make something work, or trying to get out? We don't have all the answers. What we do know is that on the night she died, there was an argument. That argument escalated. And the escalation ended in murder. This raises questions that haunt anyone trying to understand what happened. Was control an issue in their relationship? Was her killer someone who needed to dominate, to possess, to maintain power over her? Was Maya's pregnancy the trigger? Did the reality of impending fatherhood terrify him? Did he see it as a trap, a permanent connection he didn't want? Or was separation the issue? Was Maya trying to end the relationship? Had she told him it was over? Was the argument that night about her leaving, about her choosing to move forward without him? Pregnancy can be a flashpoint in troubled relationships. For some men, the news of a pregnancy triggers protective instincts, a desire to step up and be responsible. But for others, it triggers panic. Fear of commitment. Fear of responsibility. Fear of losing control over their own lives. And in relationships where abuse is already present, pregnancy often makes things worse. Much worse. Statistically, pregnant women are at higher risk of violence from intimate partners. The numbers don't lie. Homicide is one of the leading causes of death for pregnant women in the United States. That's not a random statistic. It's a pattern. It's a reality that reflects something dark about how some men respond when they feel trapped, when they feel their control slipping, when they feel cornered by the consequences of their own actions. Was that what happened here? Did Maya's pregnancy represent something unbearable to her killer? Did it push him past a breaking point he'd been approaching for a while? We don't know for certain. What we do know is that whatever was happening between them, whatever tensions were simmering beneath the surface, Maya didn't see the ending coming. There's no evidence that she was preparing for this. No indication that she had reached out to domestic violence resources or confided in friends that she was afraid. No viral social media posts warning the world that she was in danger. The violence happened privately, quietly, without warning. And that's often how it goes. When we talk about Maya's death, we have to talk about the child she was carrying. Not because that child was more important than Maya herself, but because that death represents something uniquely tragic. Under Florida law, the death of an unborn child can be prosecuted as a separate homicide. This legal recognition acknowledges that when a pregnant woman is killed, 2 lives are lost. The law sees the fetus as a victim in its own right, deserving of justice, deserving of acknowledgement. At 9 weeks, Maya's child was just beginning to take human form. Fingers and toes were forming. The heart was beating. The brain was developing. If you could have seen an ultrasound, you would have seen movement, the tiny flutter of life beginning. When Maya died, so did every moment that child would have experienced. No first steps. No first words. No kindergarten graduation. No teenage rebellion. No falling in love. No career. No dreams. No legacy. Just absence. And this matters. It matters because pregnancy is supposed to be protected. Society tells us that pregnant women should be cherished, should be handled with care, should be kept safe. We give up seats on the bus for pregnant women. We hold doors. We ask if they need help carrying things. There's a cultural understanding that pregnancy is a vulnerable state, that the woman carrying new life should be shielded from harm. But for Maya, that protection didn't exist. The person who should have been protecting her, who should have been supporting her through the challenges of pregnancy, was the same person who ended her life and the life of their potential child. Pregnancy often increases risk in violent relationships. When a woman becomes pregnant, the dynamics shift. The man can no longer pretend the relationship is casual or temporary. There's a permanent connection being formed. There will be a child that links them forever. For men who need control, who can't handle the idea of being tied down, who see children as obstacles rather than blessings, this reality can be unbearable. And sometimes, tragically, they choose to eliminate the problem rather than accept the responsibility. When news of Maya's death spread through Tallahassee, the community responded with shock. This wasn't the kind of thing that happened in their neighborhoods. This wasn't the kind of violence they expected to see on their streets. Friends and neighbors struggled to process what had occurred. The people who had seen Maya around, who had waved to her, who had lived their lives parallel to hers without really knowing her, suddenly felt the weight of proximity to tragedy. "This didn't seem possible here," was a common refrain. Because violence always feels impossible until it happens. Until it's your neighbor. Until it's someone whose name you know. Maya's family was devastated. They had lost a daughter. They had lost a grandchild they would never meet. They had lost future holidays, future celebrations, future memories. Her parents would never see her become a mother. They would never hold their grandchild. They would never see the next generation of their family begin. Instead, they were planning a funeral, making arrangements for a burial, trying to figure out how to say goodbye to someone they weren't ready to lose. The grief was private. There was no media spectacle, no national coverage, no viral outrage campaign. Just a family quietly mourning, a community quietly processing, and a city moving forward with a wound that wouldn't heal quickly. Because that's the reality of cases like this. They don't always make headlines. They don't always capture national attention. They happen behind closed doors, and they're mourned behind closed doors, and most people beyond the immediate circle of impact never even know they occurred. But that doesn't make them less important. That doesn't make Maya's life less valuable. That doesn't make her death less tragic. After the arrest, the legal system began its slow, methodical process. The suspect was charged with murder. But because of Maya's pregnancy, the charges were more severe. The prosecution would seek justice not just for Maya, but for the unborn child as well. In court, prosecutors would need to present evidence. They would need to prove that the suspect was responsible for Maya's death. They would need to demonstrate intent, or at minimum, a level of recklessness that resulted in 2 deaths. The evidence was strong. The suspect had been present at the scene. The shooting occurred inside a private home where he had access. There was a documented argument. There was a confession, or at minimum, statements that linked him directly to the crime. During initial court appearances, bail was considered. Would this person be released pending trial? Or would they be held in custody, deemed too dangerous to return to society while awaiting their day in court? The prosecution would argue for detention. They would point to the severity of the crime. They would highlight the fact that 2 lives were taken. They would note that the suspect had demonstrated a capacity for lethal violence. The defense, if they challenged bail, would argue for release under supervision. They might point to a lack of criminal history, to community ties, to factors that suggested their client wasn't a flight risk or a danger to others. But regardless of the bail decision, the legal process would continue. Discovery would be exchanged. Evidence would be analyzed. Witnesses would be interviewed. And eventually, the case would move toward either a plea agreement or a trial. Maya's death is not an isolated incident. It's part of a pattern that repeats itself across the country, day after day, year after year. Most deadly violence doesn't happen in public. It doesn't happen on street corners or in dark alleys. It doesn't involve strangers jumping out of bushes or breaking into homes through windows. It happens between people who know each other. People who are dating. People who are married. People who have children together. People who live together. People who once loved each other, or claimed to. The statistics are staggering. Intimate partner violence is one of the leading causes of death for women in the United States. More women are killed by current or former partners than by any other category of perpetrator. And pregnancy makes it worse. When you look at the data, when you study the patterns, one fact becomes undeniable. Pregnant women are at elevated risk. The period of pregnancy and the first year after giving birth are particularly dangerous times for women in abusive relationships. Why? Because pregnancy changes everything. It makes the relationship permanent in a way it wasn't before. It creates a bond that can't be broken, a connection that will last for at least 18 years, if not a lifetime. For men who need to maintain control, who can't handle commitment, who see relationships as things they can walk away from whenever they choose, pregnancy represents a trap. And when they feel trapped, some of them lash out. Maya's case illustrates this reality. She was 9 weeks pregnant. She was in a relationship with someone who had access to her home and her life. An argument escalated. Violence erupted. And she paid with her life. This is the danger of domestic violence. It hides in plain sight. It exists behind closed doors, in homes that look normal from the outside, in relationships that seem fine to casual observers. The violence is private. The fear is private. The danger is private. Until it's not. Until someone dies. Until police arrive and investigators start piecing together what happened. Until a family is left mourning. Until a community has to confront the fact that someone they knew, someone who seemed normal, was capable of murder. Even with all the information available, even with the investigation complete and charges filed, there are questions that will never be fully answered. What exactly triggered the argument that night? Was it something specific, or was it just the culmination of building tension? Had they been fighting for days, for weeks? Or did something happen in that moment that pushed things over the edge? Did Maya try to de-escalate? Did she attempt to calm things down, to diffuse the situation? Did she see the danger coming, even for a moment? Or was the violence so sudden that she had no time to react? Were there signs that others missed? Did friends and family see warning flags that they didn't recognize at the time? Did Maya confide in anyone about problems in the relationship? Did she express fear, or doubt, or a desire to leave? Could intervention have happened earlier? If someone had known, if someone had reached out, if someone had offered help, could this have been prevented? These questions haunt everyone connected to the case. Because in the aftermath of tragedy, we always want to believe it could have been stopped. We want to believe that if we had just been paying attention, if we had just asked the right questions, if we had just done something different, the outcome would have changed. But the truth is more complicated. Domestic violence operates in shadows. It thrives on isolation. It depends on victims not speaking up, not asking for help, not revealing the truth of what's happening behind closed doors. And even when people do speak up, even when they do ask for help, the system doesn't always protect them. Restraining orders get violated. Police show up and leave. Victims go back to their abusers. The cycle continues until someone breaks it or someone dies. Maya didn't get the chance to break the cycle. She didn't get the chance to leave, to rebuild, to create a safe life for herself and her child. That chance was stolen from her. When we talk about victims of violence, there's always a risk of reducing them to their deaths, of defining them solely by how they died rather than how they lived. Maya Johnson was more than a victim. She was more than a statistic. She was more than a tragic story. She was a 26-year-old woman with hopes and dreams and plans. She was building a life. She was looking forward to becoming a mother. She had family who loved her, friends who valued her, a community that knew her name. Her death took all of that away. It reduced her life to a police report, a court case, a cautionary tale. But that's not who she was. That's just how her story ended. Maya deserves to be remembered for who she was, not just for how she died. She deserves to be remembered as a daughter who stayed connected to her family, as a friend who showed up, as a woman who was private and intentional about how she moved through the world. She deserves to be remembered for the future she was building, the child she was preparing to welcome, the life she was planning to create. And she deserves justice. She deserves for her death to mean something, to spark conversations, to force people to confront the reality of domestic violence, to push systems to do better at protecting vulnerable women. Violence doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always give warning. It doesn't always provide opportunities for intervention. Sometimes it hides in familiarity. It masquerades as love. It presents itself as passion or intensity or emotional connection. And by the time the mask slips, by the time the danger becomes clear, it's often too late. Maya Johnson didn't die in public. She didn't die in a place where strangers could see and help. She died in her home, the place where she should have been safest. She died at the hands of someone she knew. Someone she trusted. Someone who had been welcomed into her life. This was not random. This was not unpredictable. This was the culmination of dynamics that had been building, tensions that had been escalating, a relationship that was moving toward a breaking point. And it was preventable. When violence escalates behind closed doors, when women try to leave dangerous relationships, when pregnancy becomes a trigger for increased abuse, we as a society have a responsibility to see the patterns, to offer support, to create systems that actually protect vulnerable people. Maya's death is a reminder that those systems failed. That the warning signs weren't heeded. That intervention didn't come in time. Her story doesn't have a happy ending. It doesn't have a moment of redemption or rescue. It has only grief, loss, and the weight of what could have been. But in telling her story, in refusing to let her death be just another statistic, we honor her memory. We acknowledge that her life mattered. That her unborn child's life mattered. That their deaths should mean something more than just another tragedy that happened behind closed doors. Maya Johnson was 26 years old. She was 9 weeks pregnant. She was building a future. And that future was stolen from her in a single moment of violence that never should have happened. She died where she should have been safest. If Maya's story has touched you, if it's made you think about the silent suffering happening behind closed doors in your own community, then her death can still mean something. It can still create change. This is the Exposed Crime, where we tell the stories that need to be told. Stories about domestic violence, toxic relationships, and the lives lost when warning signs go unheeded. We don't sugarcoat. We don't make excuses. We just tell the truth. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Every story we share matters. Every victim deserves to be remembered. And every pattern we expose might help someone recognize danger before it's too late. Drop a comment below. Tell us your thoughts on Maya's case. Share your own experiences if you feel safe doing so. Let's build a community that refuses to stay silent about violence against women. And if this story resonated with you, share it. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with someone who might be in a dangerous situation and doesn't know how to get out. Share it with someone who needs to understand that leaving isn't weakness, it's survival. For anyone watching this who sees themselves in Maya's story, who's living in fear, who's stuck in a relationship where control has replaced love, please hear this. You deserve better. You deserve safety. You deserve a life where you don't have to walk on eggshells or wonder if today will be the day things go too far. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24/7 at 1-800-799-7233. You can also text STAR to 88788 or visit thehotline.org for confidential support. These resources exist because you're not alone. Because countless others have walked this path before you. Because getting out is possible, even when it feels impossible. If you're a friend or family member who suspects someone you love is being abused, don't stay silent. Ask direct questions. Offer specific help. Be patient. Be consistent. And most importantly, believe them when they tell you what's happening. Maya Johnson's story didn't have to end the way it did. But maybe, just maybe, by telling it, by refusing to let her death disappear into silence, we can prevent the next one. Stay safe out there. Look out for each other. And remember, love should never hurt. Love should never control. Love should never make you afraid. And bringing darkness to light. Like this video if it made an impact. Subscribe for more true crime stories that matter. And share it with anyone who needs to hear Maya's message. Her voice was silenced. But ours don't have to be.